She said I was too small for her world, and everyone around her laughed. But I didn't argue. I just walked away and started building my own. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been told you'd never make it? Because this is for you. It all started 3 years ago. Back then, I was just another guy trying to make something out of nothing. I had ideas, too many maybe, and not enough people who believed in them. I was freelancing for a small tech firm, barely scraping by, spending nights hunched over a laptop in my one-bedroom apartment that doubled as my office, kitchen, and dream factory. And then there was Madison. She worked in marketing for one of the city's biggest firms. She was sharp, polished, the kind of woman who walked into a room like she owned the air itself. When we met, it felt like opposites attracting. Her world full of noise and luxury, mine full of quiet ambition. For a while, it worked. Or maybe I just believed it did. One night, she invited me to a networking dinner. One of those pretentious events where everyone pretends to care about innovation while checking each other's watches. I didn't fit in. I knew it. My jacket wasn't designer, my shoes weren't Italian, and the wine they poured cost more than my rent. Madison sat beside me, smiling that perfect smile of hers, introducing me to people I'd only ever seen in headlines. "This is Ryan," she said with a half laugh. "He's got some interesting ideas." That pause before interesting, it stung. Everyone chuckled politely, the way rich people do when they don't care what's being said. I smiled, said nothing, just nodded. As the night went on, the conversations got louder, the laughter thicker. At one point, Madison leaned in close and whispered, "Try not to talk too much about your little project. Okay?" They wouldn't get it. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I remember staring at her, my fork halfway to my mouth, realizing she wasn't embarrassed for me. She was embarrassed of me. That was the first crack. Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of her colleagues, tall guy, slicked hair, expensive smile, asked me what I did. I started explaining my startup idea, a simple platform connecting small creators with independent investors. Before I could finish, Madison interrupted. "It's kind of a side hobby," she said quickly. "He's passionate, but you know how dreamers are." The table laughed. All of them. And she laughed too. That same practiced, perfect laugh I used to love. My hand tightened around the glass. I didn't say a word. Later, as we left, she linked her arm through mine like nothing had happened. "You were quiet tonight," she said. "That's good. You don't have to impress these people." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to exist. But I didn't. I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence says more than pride ever could. When we got back to her apartment, that skyline view, marble floor, glass-walled palace, she poured herself wine and sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. "You know," she said without looking up, "you've got potential, Ryan, but you need to think bigger. My world moves fast. You're still playing small." I asked what she meant. She smiled that cold, rehearsed smile. "You're smart, but let's be honest, my friends, my clients, they're on another level. You're not quite there." It hit me like a quiet earthquake. Not loud enough to destroy the room, but strong enough to shift everything inside me. "Too small for your world," I repeated under my breath. She didn't even hear me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake watching the city lights blink through her window, listening to the hum of her success. Cars, champagne glasses, empty compliments. I realized something she never would. Her world wasn't too big for me. It was just too shallow. So I made a choice. I got up before dawn, grabbed my jacket, and left her apartment for the last time. No note, no argument, just gone. The cold morning air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Scared, but free. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. I walked until the city began to wake. Taxis honking, bakeries opening, the smell of coffee everywhere. I stopped at a diner, pulled out my notebook and started sketching plans, designs, connections. I didn't have money. I didn't have support. But I had one thing she didn't. hunger. And hunger, when mixed with humiliation, can move mountains. As the sun rose, I looked out the window and said to myself, all right, let's build something worth looking down on. That was the day everything began. The first few months after I left Madison were brutal. I didn't have savings, investors, or even a proper office. Just a notebook full of half-finished ideas, a second-hand laptop, and a rented desk in a shared workspace that smelled like stale coffee and burnt ambition. Every day felt like a test of how much failure I could take before breaking. I pitched to anyone who would listen, local entrepreneurs, small investors, even friends who thought I was crazy for leaving someone like her. You walked away from that? They'd say. Man, she could have opened doors for you. Maybe. But what they didn't get was that I didn't want doors opened for me. I wanted to build the house they all wanted to enter. I spent my days designing the platform, writing code, failing, rewriting, and failing again. At night, I'd stay in that freezing workspace long after everyone else had left, watching the city lights from the window and whispering to myself, too small for her world. Huh? We'll see about that. Every rejection email felt like a bruise. Every maybe later felt like a punch. I learned quickly that dreams don't care about feelings. They only reward endurance. There were days I couldn't afford proper meals, weeks when rent came late, and nights when doubt crept in like a shadow whispering, she was right. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. I kept building, line by line, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. I was fueled not by anger, but by a quiet determination that she would never see me broken. Then one evening, around midnight, while staring at the same piece of code for hours, I got a message from a man named Victor Hale. He was an early-stage investor known for backing unconventional ideas. He'd seen a short demo of my platform online and wanted to talk. My hands shook as I typed a reply. We scheduled a meeting for the next morning. I barely slept that night. I walked into that meeting wearing my only decent shirt and carrying more hope than sense. Victor was older, sharp, with eyes that seemed to read people faster than they spoke. I pitched my idea the way I'd done 100 times before, but this time something clicked. He didn't interrupt. He didn't smirk. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're either going to crash spectacularly or change an industry. I like those odds." He invested. Not much, but enough to breathe. Enough to hire a small team, get real servers, and give the project a name, Linkrise. Suddenly, I wasn't just another guy with a dream. I was a founder. We worked out of a tiny warehouse space converted into an office. The paint peeled, the Wi-Fi was terrible, and the heater broke every other week. But it was ours. My small team, 3 people as hungry as I was, believed in the mission. We wanted to create a platform that gave independent creators access to investors without going through the corporate maze. The idea was simple: level the playing field. As months passed, Linkrise began to gain traction. We launched a beta version, and within weeks, small businesses and freelancers started signing up. The first time I saw a creator get funded through the platform, I almost cried. It wasn't about money, it was proof that I wasn't small. I was building something real, something that mattered. But with success came pressure. Bigger investors started noticing. Meetings piled up. Nights got shorter. And for every step forward, there were 2 new problems waiting. Server crashes, legal issues, partnership deals falling apart. It felt like running uphill through a storm. But every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that dinner table, that laugh, that look in Madison's eyes when she said I wasn't enough. One night, while preparing for a major investor presentation, I caught my reflection in the dark window of the office. I looked exhausted, hollow eyes, a few new gray hairs, but behind all that, I saw something else: purpose. I realized I wasn't doing this to prove her wrong anymore. I was doing it to prove myself right. 6 months later, Linkrise officially launched. The response was explosive. Small creators flooded the platform, investors lined up, and for the first time in my life, people who used to ignore my emails were now calling me. The project that began with one man and a broken heart became a movement. My name started appearing in articles, interviews, podcasts. People called me visionary. I just called it survival. One morning, I walked into our new downtown office. a sleek glass building overlooking the same skyline I once stared at from Madison's apartment. I stood by the window, watching the traffic crawl beneath me, and felt something strange. Peace. I'd made it, at least to a place she never believed I could reach. But what I didn't know then was that life was preparing one more full-circle moment. One I never saw coming. A moment that would bring our worlds crashing together again. Only this time, I wouldn't be the one standing below. For now, all I knew was that every sleepless night, every rejection, every quiet humiliation had led to this. The city that once swallowed me whole was now whispering my name. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone else's world. I was building my own. By the time Linkrise hit its first anniversary, everything had changed. What started as a fragile idea had turned into a company with over 100 employees, multiple investors, and offices in 3 cities. The platform was growing faster than I could keep up with, and every week felt like a new storm of deals, deadlines, and opportunities. I was no longer just a man with a dream. I was a name. People wanted meetings, interviews, partnerships. I had to get used to walking into rooms where I was the one being listened to, not the one being tolerated. But even then, part of me still remembered that night when she laughed. That memory never disappeared. It just became quieter, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore but still itches when the weather changes. One morning, my assistant told me that a major corporate firm wanted Linkrise to present at their annual innovation conference. It was one of those big, formal events that drew executives, investors, and media from across the country. The kind of stage Madison used to brag about attending. Now, I was the keynote speaker. I accepted the invitation without a second thought. When the day came, I stood backstage adjusting my tie, feeling that strange calm that comes before something important. The crowd beyond the curtain buzzed with energy. Screens flashed my name. For a moment, I thought about how far I'd come from that cramped workspace with flickering lights. I whispered under my breath, "Too small for your world, huh?" and smiled. When the doors opened and the lights hit, I walked out into the spotlight. The hall was packed. Rows of professionals, journalists, photographers. My presentation wasn't flashy. I spoke about failure, about starting small, about the power of not being taken seriously. I told them how being underestimated is sometimes the greatest gift life gives you. They clapped, they nodded, they took notes. I could feel the connection, that spark when people truly listen. And then, as my eyes scanned the room, I froze for half a second. In the 5th row, a familiar face. Madison. She looked different, more subdued, almost uncertain. The shine was still there, but dimmer. Her hair shorter, her posture stiffer. She wasn't sitting in the VIP section with the executives. She was in the staff rows, wearing a conference badge clipped to her blazer. My gaze caught the small print beneath her name. Assistant. The irony almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I just kept talking, though every word suddenly carried a new weight. For the next 20 minutes, I stayed composed, steady, calm. On the surface, nothing changed. Inside, though, a storm was raging. A mix of disbelief, satisfaction, and something I couldn't quite name. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. I never expected to. And now, there she was, watching me speak on a stage she once said I'd never reach. When the presentation ended, the audience erupted in applause. I thanked them, stepped off the stage, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel nervous about who was watching. Afterward, I mingled with a few attendees, shook hands, smiled for pictures. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her lingering near the edge of the room, pretending to organize papers that didn't need organizing. I waited. Eventually, she approached, slow, hesitant, as if walking through memory. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice smaller than I remembered. "It's been a long time." I turned to face her, letting the silence stretch. "It has," I said finally. She smiled weakly, trying to recover some of her old confidence. "You look different." "So do you," I replied. She looked down at her badge, as if suddenly aware of it, and said, "I didn't know you were speaking today." I raised an eyebrow. "Neither did I know you'd be taking notes." She flinched, but quickly masked it with a forced laugh. "You've done well," she said, her tone half admiring, half regretful. "Linkrise, right? I've heard about it. Everyone has." I nodded. "Yeah, it's been a busy year." There was a pause between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, she asked, "Did you know I was here?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No, but I guess fate wanted to remind us that circles close." Her expression flickered between pride and humiliation. "You must think I'm pathetic," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, I think you were honest. You told me I was too small for your world. You just didn't realize how small your world really was." She looked like she wanted to respond, but no words came. I could see the weight of it in her eyes, the realization settling in like a slow burn. The woman who once dismissed me now worked for a company that answered to mine. Before she could say anything else, my assistant called me over to meet with a potential partner. I smiled politely and said, "It was good seeing you, Madison. Take care." I turned and walked away without looking back. Behind me, I heard her sigh, a sound of finality, of something breaking quietly inside. That night, back in my hotel room, I stood on the balcony looking out over the city lights. I thought about how life has a way of rewriting stories without warning. How sometimes, the people who make you feel small are just mirrors showing you what you could become if you stopped waiting for approval. I didn't hate her. I didn't even feel triumphant. What I felt was closure. The kind you don't need to announce or explain. I turned off my phone, loosened my tie, and let out a breath that felt like years leaving my chest. The world below shimmered with the energy of possibility, and I realized something simple but powerful. It wasn't revenge that got me here. It was growth. And maybe, deep down, that's what she had accidentally given me. A reason to rise. What I didn't know then was that the story between us still had one last, quiet chapter to unfold. But not the kind she or anyone else would expect. A few weeks after that conference, I tried to move on completely. I told myself that chapter was closed, and for the most part it was. Life had become a blur of meetings, travel, late-night strategy sessions, and an endless flow of decisions that could make or break a company. Linkrise was expanding faster than anyone predicted. Investors wanted in, new teams were forming, and partnerships with larger corporations were being finalized. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. Yet, no matter how busy I was, there were quiet moments, those rare seconds between tasks, when I found myself thinking about that look on Madison's face, the one she wore as she realized the shift in power between us. It wasn't joy that came from remembering it. It was something more like understanding. Because in that moment, I saw not just her, but every person who had ever told someone they weren't enough. And I realized how much of life's beauty is born from rejection. A month later, my assistant handed me a file. "We have a request for collaboration from MTech Consulting," she said. I flipped through the proposal and stopped at the signature. Madison Bennett, Operations Assistant. My lips curved into a small, quiet smile. Life had a sense of humor, that was for sure. MTech was a mid-sized company that wanted to integrate our funding model into their client platform. The deal was lucrative but not essential. Still, something about it felt poetic. I told my assistant to set up a meeting. I didn't tell her why I wanted to handle it personally. The following Friday, we met in a glass-walled conference room at our headquarters. Madison walked in with a team of 4. She wore a gray blazer and looked every bit the professional, but her eyes gave her away. They flickered with unease the second they met mine. I stood as she entered, offering a polite handshake. "Welcome to Linkrise," I said evenly. She hesitated before replying, "Thank you for having us." Her voice trembled just enough for me to notice. I gestured for everyone to sit, then began the meeting as if we were strangers. No history, no emotion, just business. As the discussion went on, I could see her struggle to stay composed. The others spoke confidently, pitching their proposal, unaware of the undercurrent running between us. I asked precise questions, dissected the numbers, and made them explain their projections in detail. Not to humiliate, but to lead. Madison kept her focus on the notes in front of her, occasionally adding a comment or clarifying a point, but she never looked directly at me for long. When the meeting ended, her colleagues left to wait in the lobby while she stayed behind to finalize paperwork. The room grew quiet. She finally looked up. "You've built something incredible," she said softly. "I always knew you were driven, but I never imagined." Her voice faded. I studied her for a moment before answering. "Neither did I, but I stopped imagining and started doing." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to be kind," she said after a pause. "I know what I said back then, and I was wrong." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "You weren't wrong," I said. "At the time, you just couldn't see past your own world. We all start somewhere. Yours just happened to be smaller than you thought." Her eyes shimmered with something between guilt and admiration. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. You were part of the lesson. Everyone needs one." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "When I said you were too small for my world, I never thought the day would come when I'd be working for yours." There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet truth. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the skyline that used to feel so far above me. "You know," I said, "it's strange how life works. The people who once looked down on you are sometimes the ones who help lift your company higher without realizing it." I turned back to her. "But that's not punishment, Madison. That's perspective." She nodded slowly, standing to gather her things. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "I just grew into the man you didn't see." There was a long silence before she finally whispered, "I'm proud of you, Ryan." For a moment, it almost sounded genuine, like a fragment of the person she used to be before arrogance clouded everything. I gave her a small smile. "Thank you," I said simply. "Take care of yourself." She lingered for a second longer, as if she wanted to say something more, then turned and left. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway, and with it, the last echo of that old version of my life. After she left, I stood there for a while, watching the reflection of the city in the glass. I thought about how easily people forget that time has its own way of balancing things. You can't rush it and you can't cheat it. It just happens quietly, relentlessly, until one day you wake up on the other side of the story. I realized that what she gave me all those years ago wasn't pain. It was direction. Without her dismissal, I might never have pushed hard enough to find out what I was capable of. That night, at a company dinner celebrating our latest milestone, I stood in front of my team, hundreds of people from different backgrounds, all laughing, talking, believing in something that once existed only in my mind. I raised my glass and said, "Sometimes the people who don't believe in us do us the greatest favor. They give us the reason to become who we were meant to be." The room went silent for a heartbeat, then applause filled the air. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. Everyone has their own version of that story. When the night ended, I walked out into the city streets alone. The air was crisp, the buildings glowing with light. I looked up, feeling that same mix of peace and power that comes when you realize your world no longer revolves around proving anyone wrong. It just exists on its own terms. I thought of Madison one last time, not with resentment, but gratitude. Life had come full circle, and in its quiet symmetry, I finally understood something simple but profound. The size of your world isn't measured by who's in it, but by how far you're willing to grow beyond it. And as I walked away, I smiled to myself. She said I was too small for her world. I never argued. I just built one big enough for both of us to fit inside, but only one of us to lead. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, have you ever turned someone's doubt into your reason to rise?